Elon Musk, as all of you know, is somehow manages to be reinventing two industries, both of which we cover at Popular Mechanics at the same time. The automotive industry with Tesla, which is the first company to really innovate the use of lithium-ion batteries in cars, and to launch a truly homegrown American automobile company, something that nobody has done in probably successfully in 50 years or more, and to really rethink how cars are built, what they mean, what they're and obviously how they operate. And then at the same time, in his spare time, running SpaceX, a company that is poised to really take over the lion's share of the work of moving astronauts and cargo to the International Space Station since the long overdue retirement of the space shuttle. So it's particularly exciting that NASA has shown the open-mindedness and vision to work with a private company and like SpaceX, and they will be working with others, but and I think that the efficiencies of entrepreneurial, hard-driving private company building a launch capability, and with the Dragon capsule engineering what will eventually be human-rated spaceflight capability, they're going to be able to do this at a fraction of the cost of what we've seen. And it's going to empower so much more capability to kind of restart a space program that's been kind of languishing in low Earth orbit for many years. The space station is very impressive, but certainly the reach and vision that I grew up with, that was embodied in a mission like Voyager, has not been totally absent. But I think we all share the sense that we should be and could be doing more. So I want to start off talking to you. Okay. So you launched a couple of internet companies. They did well. Where in the world did you get the idea you wanted to build rockets?
Well, the reason for SpaceX is because I think it's important that we become a multi-planet species, and we were clearly not getting there based on the progress in the space industry, and so I started SpaceX to try to solve that problem. That's the overall aspiration.
So you think humans need to be a multi-planetary species?
Well, yeah. I mean, if we are not a multi-planet species, then the probable lifespan of humanity is much less. Mm-hmm. Plus, it's going to be much more boring, I think.
So, so you're not just looking at a nice business delivering a few astronauts and some groceries to the space station every few months. You're thinking way beyond that.
Right, absolutely.
So walk us through the next 4 or 5 years. What do you see? Actually, before we get to that, let's talk. A very crucial turning point happened with SpaceX just a few months ago, with the first mission to send the Dragon capsule up to the ISS to prove that it could safely approach and dock. And and NASA's picky about strange space objects roaming around in the vicinity of their precious International Space Station. You don't want anybody going rogue and kind of crashing into your craft. So, so it was kind of a test for the future of your business. So tell us, what was it like? What was it? You were in your control room observing it all. What was the experience like?
Well, I mean, it was very nerve-wracking. Certainly for the first flight to the space station. It was the third flight of our rocket, of our Falcon 9 rocket, so I wasn't perhaps as worried about that. And we had flown our Dragon spacecraft and maneuvered around and re-entered, so I knew that the spacecraft functionality worked, but we'd not tested the proximity operations and berthing system, and there was a bunch of upgrades to the avionics. So we went from mostly single fault tolerant to being, well, actually often no fault tolerant to being 2 fault tolerant. Mm-hmm. So it's quite a big increase in complexity in the avionics and the software. So and we also added solar arrays and a radiator
And you had to prove all that stuff would work, the arrays would deploy.
Yeah.
You can't test that on Earth.
Right. You can sort of try to get a close approximation, but you can't get exactly what it's like to be in 0G. Yeah.
So you launched. You got up there. You deployed the solar array, and you had a little bit of a hiccup as you approached the space station. Nothing serious, but what was that like?
Yeah, it was a little worrying at first because the lidars wouldn't lock on. So as we approached the space station, we scanned the space station with sort of things kind of like a laser radar. So it laser scans the space station and then recreates that model internally in the computer to figure out the relative position and movement of the two. But you need we need a definite lock as opposed to an ambiguous lock. And the actual space station is a little different from the model of the space station. Because
and it had some highly reflective spots on it or something like that, right?
Yeah. So essentially the computer wasn't 100% sure. It was pretty sure, but not 100% sure that it had a lock on the space station. So what we're able to do is just upload new software. So diagnose the problem, then run that software as a simulation on a hardware-in-the-loop version of Dragon we have on the ground. So we have a complete version of Dragon that includes all the avionics software, valves, and everything. And we can run accelerated simulations on that system and verify that it would work.
And you did that all while you were in the midst of the mission.
Yeah, so we had a proposed code change, ran it on our hardware simulator. It worked, uploaded the code patch, and achieved lock on the space station with that. Essentially narrowed the field of view.
And then so they reached out with the Canadarm and they locked onto the Dragon.
Yeah, we sort of like narrowed the field of view like putting blinkers on a horse. You know?
And so ultimately the goal here is to have the Dragon capsule be human rated.
Yeah.
How does that process work? What do you need to do to convince NASA that they can put their astronauts on your spacecraft?
Technically, astronauts have been on the spacecraft at the space
station.
That's
true, yeah.
So we've already done a lot of work to pass the space station safety review. So, because as Dragon is approaching the space station, it's a robotic space freighter, basically. And if something were to go wrong, it could potentially destroy the, touch wood, shudder at the thought. But I mean, in an absolute worst case,
you could have a mission termination event. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I mean, something terrible could happen to the space station, and people on board could be hurt. So obviously there's a lot of caution that's exercised there, both obviously at SpaceX and at NASA, and before we even get close to the space station, we've run 1 million simulations, and we're checking it as we get closer. We're verifying that everything looks good. But it is an autonomous vehicle, so it's not as though there's somebody there with a joystick that's sort of steering it. It's just pausing at various points to ask for permission to proceed. And then we'll look at the data, make sure everything's cool, and then give it the okay to go to the next, essentially, waypoint. But it's doing all of the guidance and control itself.
So let's talk about manned missions. How do we get there?
So to add essentially the ascent and descent elements of manned space flight, because we essentially have it's man-rated, if you will, for being around the space station, but not for the ascent and descent phases. And the ascent phase, we need to add a launch escape system. So if something were to go wrong with the booster, we can escape from the booster. And then we've got to also do some upgrades to the rocket to make sure it's as fault tolerant as possible, and for those parts where it's not really feasible to make it fault tolerant, that we've tested the living daylights out of it, and it'll have safety margins that are higher than a rocket that would carry a satellite. And typically, to rough rule of thumb, people aim for about a 25% margin on satellite mission, and but a 40% margin on a manned mission, above the expected flight loads.
Okay.
And so now our abort system I'm pretty excited about, because this is going to be the first time that there'll be abort capability all the way to orbit, or proper abort capability all the way to orbit, because the launch escape engines are built into the sidewall of the Dragon spacecraft, and they use the same propellant that would otherwise be used for on-orbit maneuvering. Because you either need to maneuver on orbit or you need to escape. You don't need to do both.
Right. If you had to escape, you're not going to be doing any maneuvering after that.
It's like one or the other. And as a result, we can avoid having the big solid rocket on the nose. And that has some real advantages, because that big solid rocket's so heavy that you can't carry it all the way to orbit. So you usually have to discard it about maybe 3 minutes into the flight. So you don't have you don't have high acceleration escape capability all the way to orbit, but you will with Dragon.
So that means you need enough power in those that even in the boost phase, if something is going wrong, for the Dragon to accelerate away ahead of
in fact,
of the rocket.
It has enough thrust to accelerate away from the rocket, even in at what's called max Q, which is max dynamic pressure. So even when it's sort of going somewhere about Mach 1.8 or so, and the rocket is sort of going full force below it, it still has enough thrust to actually get away from the rocket. Now, being a liquid rocket, we do have an advantage that we can turn it off. You know, and it's pretty easy to turn off. In fact, liquid rockets, the tough part is making it stay on. That's what you need to worry about. But for solid rockets, I mean, once they're on, they tend to stay on.
Yeah.
So I'm not a big fan of solid rockets for human transportation, honestly.
Yeah. Well, we certainly saw, you know, in the shuttle disaster, the first one, we certainly saw the vulnerability of what we thought was a very simple, well-understood technology.
Yeah, I mean, although solid rockets are themselves, you know, quite reliable, particularly if you don't have segments, but you can't turn them off. And so if something goes wrong with the overall system, you're going to have some things kind of wanting to hit you in the butt that kind of hard to get away from. Right.
And then you also have what's kind of exciting about Dragon is to see a re-entry with parachute and splashdown.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Well, so version 1 of Dragon, you know, it's pretty basic, really. I would classify it as kind of level 1, you know, re-entry and landing, which is parachutes to water landing. It's fairly straightforward and fairly reliable. But what we're going to for version 1.5 is we're going to go parachutes to a land landing. Well, maybe I'm hoping we'll be able to do that next year, but certainly the year thereafter. And then level 2, or like. Or maybe even level 3, because maybe level 2 is like wings, but then level 3 would be landing with thrusters.
And you've been testing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another advantage of having the escape thrusters built into the sidewall of Dragon is that when you come back, you can use them to land. So they're really high precision, and they're redundant thrusters. We have 8, and you can lose. Well, if you lost the right 4, you could lose 4. But you can lose at least 1.
Every other one.
Yeah, they're in pairs. So, we've gone back and forth, like, how do we make this better? But there's so many constraints to the system. But this is pretty good. You can lose any one of the engines and still be safe. And then we have parachutes as a backup on top of that. So, and the parachutes are redundant. So really, this should be. I can't think of a safer way to do it, honestly. You know, is to have redundant thrusters and redundant parachutes for landing. And then in a best case scenario, you can be really quite reusable, because you can land propulsively just like they landed on the moon. And that sets you up for reuse quite well.
So obviously you have a lot of plans for your company in terms of missions to space, some in conjunction with what NASA's needs in serving kind of as their delivery service, but also some launching satellites. But tell us, what is the business plan? I mean, 10 years out, where do you see, you know, you're in business, where does the revenue come from outside of government contracts?
Oh, well, I guess a lot of people aren't aware that of the 46 missions we have under contract, only 12 are for NASA.
Mm-hmm.
So the great majority of our missions are actually commercial missions, satellite launch missions. That's both for our Falcon 9 rocket and our Falcon Heavy rocket. And then we're hopeful that maybe Dragon could have some commercial use as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking to some people, like there's a guy Bigelow who's wants to do a private space station, and that could be pretty cool, because then we could maybe deliver people to his space station, share costs with NASA, reduce the burden of NASA in that regard. I think so. We really want. I mean, the general approach is like, what are the things that we can do to further the cause of space? Mm-hmm. Then that's what we'll do. Now, some of those things are maybe not going to be the most commercially, I mean, they wouldn't be necessarily profit maximizing, but I don't really care, and that's why I'm making sure I maintain control of the company.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you don't need to come back to your shareholders and explain every decision every quarter. You can take the long view.
Yeah. I mean, SpaceX is going to be a valuable company. But I think it's. I don't think investors. We have some venture investors. I don't think they're too worried about that. But there are different ways to run a company. You can run a company where you're sort of really under the gun with each quarter, and you've got to make a lot of short-term optimizations, which makes it difficult to make big technology advancements, because some of those can take years to pay off. And so you're just at the wrong interval, wrong polling interval to make those big changes if you're beholden to things on a quarterly basis.
Right, right. Now, and as I mentioned, this SpaceX is just one of your companies. In your other company at Tesla, you're also pushing technological boundaries a lot closer to home. We actually gave a breakthrough award to the original Tesla Roadster some years back, a truly revolutionary vehicle in that almost single-handedly changed the perception of electric cars.
Right.
And no question, given the growing sophistication of internal combustion gasoline engines. In fact, we'll see one tonight. It's a tricky market, and identifying the customers is tricky. But you recently launched with a lot of some very positive reviews from the automotive press, including Popular Mechanics, the Model S.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about the thinking behind the Model S.
Sure.
And there'll be one outside in front, by the way. So definitely, and something else, a real surprise. So tell us a little bit about that.
So the goal of Tesla has been to change the people's thinking with respect to electric cars. People were operating under this illusion that an electric car had to be, let's say, aesthetically challenged.
That's nice. That's a polite way to put it.
Low performance, low range, and it kind of looked like a golf cart. And none of these had to be true. But I talk to people and say, look, these things don't have to be true, and and you can have a long-range car. Mm-hmm. Physics is pretty obvious. It's like, what's the energy density of lithium-ion, and what's the energy usage per mile, and it's pretty straightforward. And people are like, oh no, that can't work. And I was like, well, where's the error in the calculations here? These are pretty obvious. And yet, amazingly, people would refuse to they'd either ignore it or say, oh, it couldn't be done, or like, it's ridiculous. So we just decided to make a car, and that's pretty hard to ignore. Whereas discussions or PowerPoint are much easier to ignore. And it is. I mean, everything does work on PowerPoint, so that is. To people, that there is reason for skepticism there, but having an actual car, and one that's fully homologated for use on the roads and meets all the safety standards and everything was really important. So we did that with the Roadster, and after the Roadster, then people say, oh, sure, you could make a small electric sports car. You couldn't make a real car, like a Mercedes or an Audi, or like that has all of the features and capabilities. So then we made the Model S, actually, and it was really people were quite skeptical that we can make the Model S at all. And then we made the Model S. Now, like, oh, you couldn't possibly ramp up production. Okay, like ramp up production. It's like a series of issues. But the goal with the Model S is to show you could have a long-range electric car, and then with the recent announcement of the supercharger, where we're building a nationwide network of really fast chargers, hence the name supercharger, recycled obviously from the gasoline industry or gasoline car industry. And the idea there is you'll be able to charge your car with the same level of convenience as you would normally use your gasoline car. So if you do a trip that starts at 9 a.m., by noon you want to stop for a bite to eat and go to the restroom and gas up your car. And that's typically 20 to 30 minutes. And so we're able to figure a way with some advanced charging technology to have it such that you could stop for half an hour and have 3 hours of driving recharge, so about a 6-to-1 ratio, which is about the convenience inflection point for most people for a long-range trip. So we made that work, and then we added solar panels to the supercharger stations to address the long tailpipe argument that says, oh, you're just pushing emissions to the power plant. Well, no, because those supercharger stations will actually generate more electricity than the cars use in recharging.
And I have to put, as editor of Popular Mechanics, I have to note that argument that you're pushing emissions to the power plant, even if you didn't have the solar charging, it's true, but only to a point, because it forgets that a gasoline engine is only 30-some% efficient.
Even less, yeah.
Yeah. So it's true that you're burning fuel somewhere to power that car, but the electric motor is and the batteries are extremely efficient. So even if you're burning coal to power the vehicle to make the electricity, you still have a lower carbon footprint than a gasoline engine.
Right, absolutely. And I'll address that exact argument and maybe elaborate on a bit on it. But with the supercharger, so it's basically same level of convenience for doing long distance trips. We'll have it nationwide. We already have it throughout California, so you can drive anywhere in California using a supercharger. And it's going to have enough solar panels to generate electricity back to the grid on an annual basis. So that's how we're sizing them, so it'll be slightly energy positive. And then we're also making it free. So, I mean, it's not entirely free. Obviously, the cost of it is built into the cost of the Model S. But the cost was actually so low, we looked at it and said, well, we could charge some small amount for this, or we could really make it free for somebody who's bought a Model S.
A full charge for the Model S is, even in a state with pretty high electricity rates, it's a couple of dollars of electricity.
It's a little more than that, but it's for if you were to stop and put in, say, 150 miles of range, it's like $4 or $5.
Okay.
I mean, it's like it's really not much, and people drive long distance a lot less than they think they do, and so I wanted to have something that was really profoundly better than a gasoline car. For driving a long distance. So not just try to equal a gasoline car, but say, what can we do that makes an electric car suddenly better than a gasoline car? And so that's where free long distance, is pretty awesome. You can't do that with gasoline; it's way too expensive. And so the basic tagline is it's drive anywhere for free on pure sunlight forever.
That sounds like a pretty good equation. Now, you have had a little bit of political pushback in various quarters. I know you released a statement yesterday about the pace of paying back the Department of Energy loan that Tesla received, and you even got a little bit of a shout out last night in the debate of the sort that maybe
I think you mispronounced our name and called us Tester or something. But yeah.
So can you speak to that?
I love being a political football. Well, I mean, I guess with respect to Tesla, I mean, here's where things are. Tesla's got over 3,500 people. and I mean, these are high-quality jobs. We manufacture from the ground up in the U.S., so you know, it's effectively, like, at least with respect to Tesla, a resurgence in American manufacturing activity. Where like the car is critically acclaimed. We actually export powertrains to the rest of the world because we have Toyota and Mercedes as customers. So we ship electric powertrains to those guys. So we're a net exporter. We're helping with balance of payments. We're expecting to be break even next month, which is, you know, pretty fast after the introduction of the Model S, I think. And yeah, so. And then if you look at our market cap, you know, the value that the stock market ascribes to Tesla is about $3 billion. And if you were to take every company that's failed in every DOE program, it doesn't add up to $3 billion. So if you were to actually look at this as a venture portfolio, from a venture portfolio standpoint, presumably Mitt Romney understands these things, but maybe not, then the net gain is very significant. You have to say what value has been added to the American economy, what value has been subtracted from the companies that didn't work out, and the net is very positive. So one would have to say that the DOE has actually done quite a good job.
So, so what's next? I understand we're gonna get a little peek at an upcoming prototype in Tesla's lineup out front today.
You are? Wait.
The X, I think, is.
Oh, yeah. Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Although I should have just left you hanging. You might have revealed some great secret that
no, actually
would have made news.
Right. We did unveil the Model X earlier this year. And the Model X is an SUV that's built on the same platform as the Model S. It's got a slightly longer wheelbase, but otherwise is on the same platform, and it's really addressing the SUV and minivan market. And it's got a unique innovation, which is a double-hinged gull-wing door on the side that's never been done before, I believe. Certainly hasn't been done in any production car. They're called the Falcon Wing because it looks kind of like, when both doors are up, it looks like a sort of Falcon
Which
dive.
is worth, right there, worth buying the car.
Right. I think it's the coolest door. It's the coolest door. As doors go, it's pretty cool. That's the reason it has to be a double hinge is because if you just made it a single hinge gull wing, the arc as it swings out too far and then too high. But as a double hinge, you can actually do this thing where it basically does this movement. So it's actually going almost straight up. And if you can physically fit between the Model X and another car, then you can open the door. And it's actually more convenient than a minivan door because minivan door, when that opens, it comes out and slides, so you can't get to the car from the rear. But in the Model X, you can when the door's open.
That's neat.
Yeah.
So that'll be another one that's out front this afternoon before the evening event. So let's go back to Mars. When Joe Papalardo and I came out to interview you a few weeks ago, we had a really interesting conversation about your vision of humans settling Mars, and not just a small outpost, akin to the South Pole Station, say, of,
That'd be a nice start, though.
Yeah, that would be a nice start. And actually, a lot of what's happening there is a pretty good model to understand.
Yeah, I think in the very beginning, it may be similar to an Antarctic station.
But then eventually, you see large scale, actual human migration there. Tell us how you envision that. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's the thing we should be aiming for long term, is to create a self-sustaining civilization on Mars. I mean, that's the thing that will ensure that in the event of a calamity on Earth, civilization continues. The light of consciousness is not extinguished. Those seem like good things to me. So I think that's what we should strive for. I don't think we need to do anything at the Antarctic. I think that's nice, but at Mars we should be aiming for a real sort of civilization, which obviously ultimately means taking, at least tens of thousands of people, perhaps ultimately millions of people, and millions of tons of cargo, because you've got to recreate the industrial base of Earth. So to do that, you need really big rockets and launching a lot, obviously.
And in terms of, we've worked with Buzz Aldrin and others in envisioning some of the different ways that that this might be done. And in fact, just a few months ago, we had a cover story called "How to Mine an Asteroid." Obviously, with the notion that that some of your fuel sources may come from water-bearing asteroids. Do you see a progression that might have intermediate stations, refueling resources in space to help us kind of leapfrog our way?
I don't think about. I don't think that's going to be. It shouldn't make that a requirement on the way to Mars, but I think that could be. That's a potential optimization, is to mine near-Earth asteroids for propellant. But the near-Earth asteroids are not very big. I guess the Moon is also a potential, a place for propellant depot.
And it looks like they're finding more water, or at least more likely spots where water might be on the Moon.
Yeah, I mean, it's in like permanently shadowed craters. I mean, it's pretty chilly in there. But you could mine the Moon potentially for water, and that could be you could have propellant depots on the Moon. But I think I'd liken it to like when the early colonies in the Americas were being established. I mean, and the early voyages of discovery. You kind of want to go there, and then if it turns out that having way stations makes that trip more efficient over time, then those people will build those stations. As soon as you've got that destination, you've got the forcing function, then you'll see people will do whatever seems sensible to make that better.
I see. So you're saying get there and establish this as a desirable thing, and then some of that intermediary infrastructure might have there might be more of an impetus for developing that, instead of assuming that we have to do all these things over decades to create the capability.
Right. You definitely don't need to have to mine asteroids to get people to Mars. You definitely don't need to do that. So I'd say that you should definitely, since it's incredibly hard to begin with, unless something needs to happen, I would toss it out and let people do it if it makes sense later when you've got that forcing function of the trips between the planets. But I think the thing to do is to, at least what I think is what I think. We need to build really big rockets, and I think they should probably, use methane, because that's the cheapest fuel, and then you can refuel methane on Mars by taking CO2 from the atmosphere, mining water ice. There's a huge amount of water ice on Mars, and get CH4 and O2. It's pretty easy. It's like basic Lego, and that's the way to go. And just make them real big and launch them a lot, and reusable. It must be reusable. This is important.
So I'm gonna open the floor to questions in just a second, but you've said a number of times that at least in principle, that you might even like to move to Mars yourself someday.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
And so what would it be like? I mean, what do you envision? I mean, so, what does the Mars resident do when he gets up in the morning?
I don't know, lots of exploring. And I think you'd probably be working on building infrastructure on Mars and exploring and seeing all the interesting things. Like Valles, Marinas, like makes the Grand Canyon look tiny. It's kind of cool to go down that and check it out. So go to the top.
Mountaineering?
Yeah, Olympus Mons, which is pretty shallow gradient, but it's the tallest mountain in the solar system. So sort of exploring a new planet, I think, would be pretty interesting, and then building the infrastructure necessary to make life self-sustaining on Mars.
So I'm gonna open the floor to questions here. Yes, Seth.
So a lot of the limitations with the current generation of electric cars come from the limitations of lithium-ion batteries. Have you seen any sort of promising next-generation battery chemistries you think could have some serious auto applications?
Yeah, Well, first of all, I think if we had to, I think we could, just with incremental improvements to lithium-ion, I think we could turn the entire automotive world to pure electric. It gets harder for airplanes because you need a higher energy density for airplanes. But certainly, if you call it for cars, boats, trains, lithium-ion could do it. And there are some sort of modest breakthroughs happening in lithium-ion for example, change the anode from carbon to silicon. And there are some lithium-ion chemistries like lithium sulfur that actually have really, really high density, sort of in the 400 to 500 watt-hours per kilogram range, versus current state-of-the-art lithium-ion, which is about 250 watt-hours per kilogram. But that said, I do think there's a potential for a breakthrough in capacitors. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's what I was going to be studying at Stanford before I dropped out, was working on high energy density capacitors and leveraging the equipment that's been developed for advanced chip making and photonics to create something that's solid state with but precise down essentially at the molecular level, and see if the tens of billions of dollars invested in making really tiny circuits could be used to create an ultracapacitor with high energy density. And there are some companies, there was one company I know in particular, based in Silicon Valley. It's not eStore, in case people are wondering, that I think has the potential for a breakthrough in that arena. And then that could be quite revolutionary.
Yes, Josh.
Just real quick, you seem to develop technologies that not only make breakthroughs for that field, but then you try to make it a better product than what exists out there, going to go straight up, or the safest rocket I've ever heard of. What drives that philosophy, and how does that guide you in your future projects?
Right. Well, if you're sort of a newcomer product, it's really not enough to just be as good as the incumbent product, because people are used to what they're used to. I mean, it's kind of, people are set in their ways. So in order to get people to change, you have to do something that's meaningfully better. That can't, that otherwise the gradient of change, the change with respect to time, that change is going to happen slowly. So if you want to happen fast, it's got to be obviously better. And that's why we've tried very hard with the Model S to create a car that's obviously better. And doing something like the supercharger. We could have said, oh, every time you use a supercharger, it's going to be $5, and then people would have to do some math to figure out, okay, well, what does that mean relative to, And it's like, it's free, and then people understand free. That's real easy to communicate.
Yes.
In terms of inspiring and motivating the young engineers that work in your companies, do you have a particular philosophy that kind of drives you well?
Particular philosophy. Well, I think it is important to be highly adaptive, and I do think physics is a good framework for thinking. So I think particularly as you're trying to figure out new things, reasoning from first principles is a good way to go, as opposed to reasoning by analogy. I mean, it's computationally easier to reason by analogy, and if you try to reason from first principles all the time, you wouldn't be able to get through your day. But when you're trying to do something new and complicated, that is the way to do it, because analogies are necessarily imperfect. I mean, and they're relying on things that have already occurred. So if you try to make something new, then it's not a great way to go. And reasoning first principles just really means boiling something down to the fundamental truths, or what appear to be the fundamental truths, and reasoning up from there. That's really what it means. And then having a good feedback loop. So you're seeing what happens and adjusting accordingly. And then I think it's important to be particularly alert to negative feedback. because people generally, particularly friends, they'll be reluctant to give you negative feedback because they don't want to hurt you. And the reason they're reluctant to do that is because most people are hurt when they get negative feedback. It's not an unreasonable expectation. So you need to actually coax people to give you, you encourage negative feedback, and listen to it carefully, and don't react in a bad way when you receive it. That's really important.
Yes?
How do you look at analogies in your different businesses? So, if you ever do make it to Mars, would you try and create first payment systems on Mars?
I think payment systems are actually pretty easy. If you don't have to, particularly if you don't have to integrate with a lot of legacy stuff, then payment systems are super easy. Yeah, that's just like World of Warcraft, it's like real. You got like credits. It's just like how many credits do you have in your database.
If you don't need an exchange rate.
Yeah, if you don't have exchange rates and have to like interface with bills and coins and then have credit cards and have a Federal Reserve and all these things, that they complicate things. What PayPal really did was decomplicate things. But PayPal will be like super trivial if in a new environment.
Yes, and back.
So your story about going against the convention, right? When you showed them the calculation of all of this, it's just never going to work. It's actually a pretty common one for innovators. I keep on hearing the story with anyone who's ever won anything major or made any breakthroughs. We tried to convince the NSF, but they just weren't buying the idea. We're trying to convince. So how do we break out of the fear of going against the convention, right? Obviously, not every idea becomes the biggest breakthrough, right? How do you know that when everybody else disagrees with you, that that's the right thing to pursue?
Well,
I
I think it's just like you need to show that that it's physically possible. It's like, so you just need to make sure. Step one would be like just envelope it with physics and make sure you haven't done something that violates like conservation of energy or momentum or something like that, because then you're almost certainly wrong, even if somebody tells you you're right. Those things are pretty important. You got to just basically ensure that success is one of the possible outcomes. That's key. And then like often these things can be illustrated with some very straightforward equations. You don't need to get super complicated. And so if you can sort of walk people through that, that's helpful. But I don't know, it's just amazing. I've literally been in situations where I point out the series of obvious things, like three like childlike equations, like super, like maybe 11th grade or something like that. And it's like obviously comes to this conclusion, and yet people are still not convinced. And I'm like, how can you look at that and not be convinced? Like, let me tell you one of my pet peeves: space solar power. Okay, the stupidest thing ever. And if anybody should like space solar power, it should be me. All right, I got a rocket company and a solar company. I mean, I should be really on it, But it's like super obviously not going to work because, if you have solar panels, because first of all, it has to be better than having solar panels on Earth, right? So then you say, okay, a solar panel is in orbit. You get twice the solar energy, assuming that it's out of Earth's shadow. But you've got to do a double conversion. So you've got to convert it from photon to electron to photon back to electron. And so you've got to make this double conversion. So okay, what's your conversion efficiency? I mean, all in, you're going to have a real hard time actually even getting to sort of 50%. So no,
it's a conversion.
No, it does not matter. Put that solar cell on Earth then. See, that's the point I'm making. Take any given solar cell. Is it better to have it on Earth, or is it better to have it in orbit? What do you get from being in orbit? You get twice as much sun, best case. But you've got to do a conversion. You've got to convert it to photons, the energy to photons, well, you have incoming photons that go to electrons, but you've got to do two conversions that you don't have to do on Earth, which is you've got to turn it to photons and then turn those photons get back into electrons. And that double conversion is going to it's going to get you back to where you started, basically. So why are you bothering sending them to bloody space? And by the way, it's
there goes our next cover story.
Maybe someone could stab that bloody thing through the heart. And by the way, electron to photon converters are not free, and nor is sending stuff to space. So then obviously super doesn't work.
So I think we have
Case closed.
Yes.
You'd think,
I think we have time for
case closed.
Yes.
I mean, but no, I guarantee you it's going to come up another 10 times.
They can just get a really long extension cord.
I mean, for the love of God.
So I think we have time for one more question. Yeah. Yes, Stuart.
So I'm really intrigued by your the colonization of Mars vision. There's some peripheral interest in sort of planetary engineering infrastructure concepts, how you would establish it. So I'm curious about your view of the sort of biological aspects. For example, muscle atrophy and bone density loss during transit. There used to be a lot of federal investment in research to try to address those issues. I guess we probably years when we get Mars. But so in terms of, I kind of believe that the technology solutions offset some of those concerns. But what are your view in terms of addressing the biological side of long-term space flight in addition to building the vehicle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's okay. I mean, I don't think it's. I think the whole sort of interplanetary human flight thing, in terms of it being a danger to people, is somewhat overblown. Because clearly, we've sent people to the moon, right, and that's deep space, and they live to quite an old age. We're not seeing any premature deaths, really, of people that have gone to the moon. So there's really just a question of, well, how long can you be in deep space? There's a certain damage rate per day, which is then offset by your body's ability to repair that damage. So going to Mars and doing a 6-month journey is you're gonna have some slight increased risk of cancer, but from what I've seen, sort of back of the envelope analysis, that increase in cancer is less than if you smoked on the way there. So, although smoking is quite bad, I have to say. But it's not. I think that there is one thing that one should be concerned about, which is solar flares. But this is often thought about in the wrong way, where people say, oh, you need to have, you need 20 feet of water or whatever it is to shield against a serious solar storm. And then they say, oh, you have to have a sphere of water around you, and that sphere of 20-foot water would be ridiculously expensive, or ridiculously heavy. And that's true, but actually what you really do is you'd have a column of water pointed at the sun, and you'd be in front of the column. That would make more sense. And then you've got to have water anyway, so it doesn't really end up being a big deal. So I don't think the journey there is there's no showstoppers there. But over time, we will find ways to improve it and reduce risk of cancer and that kind of thing, and reduce the journey length as well. So, but really fundamentally, we need to get there. If we can't get there, this is all academic. So we just need to get there.
Okay. Well, on that note, I want to thank you very much for joining us.